Although we talk about Vermeer quite often as a mystery, as an enigma, we are now, thanks to this exhibition and the research, closer to Vermeer than we've ever been before.
It's interesting to see that when we think about his life and all of these children, it's more like we in Dutch would say a Jan Steen household. I mean, there's a lot going on, a lot energy, rumor going on, where his paintings are very refined. It's all about silence. It's all about balance. So there seems to be a huge contrast between these two works, and it's almost as if the artist working in his ateliers upstairs in his house was really focusing on these paintings that showed a completely different world from his own living space.
We've done quite a lot of technical examination here at the Rijksmuseum in collaboration with the Mauritshuis. And for example, in the Milkmaid, by looking through the paint layers, we figured out that he actually used an underpainting before he started his elaborate compositions. And he moved around with different objects, for example. Painted something, a fire basket in the lower right-hand corner of the Milkmaid, and then he removed it again and put a stove instead of that, or a jug rack behind the head of the Milkmaid. But then apparently he figured out that there was too much focus on that. And then he removed it again and then brought back the focus on this, on the girl. And that's what he's doing all the time. So we almost see him struggling as an artist and improving himself up to the last stage in his painting process.
You would really expect at least one or two portraits, but there are none, at least non-secure. That's a really fascinating aspect, I think, of this artist. He might be the figure who's at the outer left-hand side in the Procurus from Dresden, but we do not have any secure self-portraits or portraits. I think a wonderful thing is that when you walk through the exhibition, all of a sudden you see how many faces Vermeer has as a painter. It's all different. And we have always the idea that he's the master of the girl with the pearl earring, for example, or the milkmaid. But seeing all of these paintings together now, we really see how experimental he was and how many different ways of approach he had as an artist.
It's hard to tell if Vermeer really portrayed individuals with the purpose of portraying an individual person. I think when you look at the girl with the veil from Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, I mean, there you really see individual characteristics. But most often, a portrait is a kind of rendezvous between an artist and a model. And it's interesting that we are able to recognize Vermeer's specific hand as a painter, but also see the features of an individual, like we do the same with Rembrandt, for example. So style and technique are part of, let's say, the journey of an artist. So what we think today is that when we look at the different figures in Vermeer's paintings, that these are much more types, so not a portrait of his wife or of particular children. It's a way in which Vermeer shows off, I mean, how he's able to work with light, for example, with specific brushstrokes, with particular features in the face, and so on and so on. When you walk through the exhibition, I mean, one of the first things you will notice is how many women are the main protagonists in Vermeer's paintings. And in all different kinds of situations. So reading, writing letters, playing music. That's, let's say, women as the main characters in his paintings. It's crucial, I believe. When you think about Vermeer in his private life, with about 8 or 9 girls in his household, it's a time span in which paintings do have quite often a deeper meaning or level of meaning than they do have today. And for us, it's always tricky to reconstruct what a painting actually wants to convey and wants to tell. So what is exactly the narrative? We see, for example, how Paintings in the background, for example, a painting of Cupid, recur several times, so in several paintings, and we can read them as a kind of key to the meaning of the paintings when we see someone reading a letter, for example. So Cupid, well, could tell something about the meaning or content of the letter that's being read at that moment. It's very easy to identify to these specific tiny little narratives that we look at. And when we travel with our paintings around the globe, from Japan to Brazil to the Near East or United States or Canada, we see that the audience has comparable reaction on these paintings. And that makes that these tiny little stories have something universal. It's all about humanity, it's all about everyday scenes, but in a very restricted, pure, balanced way they've been depicted. The devotional background of the Jesuit order that was living next door of Vermeer's household had a huge impact on his paintings. And by looking at devotional treatises and comparing them with paintings by Vermeer, all of a sudden these paintings by Vermeer get a deeper meaning. For example, when you think about the girl with the pearl necklace, the way she's standing is almost exactly the same as a print that derived in a devotional book that was written by the Jesuits and which says something like, don't look at yourself, but look at him, meaning God or Jesus. These paintings appear to be about vanity, and something comparable we see with The Woman with a Balance from Washington National Gallery, where a woman is standing with a scales in front of a painting depicting the Last Judgment. So it's interesting to see that, well, this Dutch artist who was born and raised in a Protestant environment, married into a Catholic family, but also developed as an artist in a Catholic atmosphere. And several of the paintings, well, appear to refer to much more devotional meanings than we've ever thought before.
What would be important for Vermeer, knowing the Jesuits next door? The Jesuits were very, very interested in optics because they could use fashionable optics to interpret faith, to interpret the message of God. And in this sense, light is so important with the Jesuits, and the camera obscura is very important for the Jesuits, that even in a sermon, in a preach on Sunday, they could preach about the camera obscura and had in this preach the whole explanation, how it functions, what it does it mean, and what that is even better than every painting you can imagine. So now I see Vermeer sitting in that church together with his lots of children, hearing that, and then he must have said, okay, I tried. I don't think that he painted with the camera obscura and also not in the camera obscura. I think he used it to study how our own perception is working. The Jesuits are saying that the camera obscura is a model for our eye, and they can really make it very clear how it functions. So I think if you are a painter and then you see on the screen what is happening there with the camera obscura, where you have an image projected, then you can study all the effects of light. I think one of the finest examples is the lace maker from the Louvre. There you can see that she is working with her hand, and the little threads in between her hands are very sharp, little white stripes. And then your eye is going to the foreground, and all the threads there, the white and red and so on, are very blurred. How could you see that? He saw this. So, and then he switched not to the hand, but he painted only this sharp, and the rest he painted unsharp. And this you can only see if you have the experience with the camera obscura, with the screen, where you can see that. Every photographer knows it today, but in these times it was absolutely new.
So I don't believe he knows what's really going on in a scientific way, but as an observing artist, he sees what's happening and he understands what the thickness of air is, for example, and how it's in between us and an object in the distance. And this is how he's playing with these, well, optical effects, for example, or light just shimmering over bread in front of the milkmaid, for example. I mean, you really get the feeling of three-dimensionality and how light touches different surfaces. And I mean, that's one of the key signatures of Vermeer as an artist. He's using quite exceptional materials, meaning, for example, the way he applies lapis lazuli as a very precious stone that came all the way from Afghanistan already in the 17th century. It's a stone which was refined and grained and then used as a basis for this very radiant blue that he's using in, well, several of his paintings. I mean, once you've noticed it, you see it's all over his oeuvre. And it's a completely different way of incorporating this than Rembrandt did, for example. So it was a very precious material, even more precious than he himself could have afforded in his own time. So probably there was someone close to him or near him who acquired this material and, well, handed it over to him to incorporate it in his paintings. There is a kind of tendency of comparing Vermeer with photography or filmmaking, the way he's cropping his images, for example, his compositions, perspective, depth, the way he's using light, most often coming from the left, for example, these tiny little focused scenes, it's like film stills. And that makes probably that even contemporary filmmakers look at him as a very important source of inspiration. I think in several of these paintings there is a moral point of view, more in general within society. So live a virtuous life, for example. Or it could be from a religious point of view, and then mostly from a Catholic point of view. And that's something that we're seeing, for example, in Woman Holding a Balance, or the Girl with a Pearl Necklace, or the allegory of Catholic faith. Although you would think in first glance that there are a lot of paintings with female protagonists, mostly in these quiet, focused scenes, there's a lot of diversity in what he's doing as well. Vermeer's moving all over the field, and he's opening doors with a view of Delft, for example, which is one of the most amazing townscapes that's ever been made in the Netherlands. But once he's developed that, he's not creating another view of Rotterdam or Amsterdam or Leiden. No, he's going on to genre painting. And then he creates some quite large-scale paintings, but just one or two. And then he moves on. And that's something he's doing all the time. Opening up doors, developing something. Then once he reaches that particular level of quality, he moves on to something new. And I think that makes him a very innovative, experimental artist. I think it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful to see how 17th century painting is still that relevant to us, and that new generations of art lovers, are now able to get acquainted with Vermeer. And we will hand them over to the next generation now. So I hope that in, let's say, 30 or 40 years, there will be a next opportunity for the youngest to see that another show again. But it will be hard, probably.